The power sector is obvious to many as being the single biggest ticket sector within the infrastructure space. It's a network form of infrastructure together with water. That's what makes it very different from sanitation, even though you can have water sanitation-based systems as well that also has a network feature to it, but a lot of the sanitation solutions tend to be off-network. Power and water are very strongly dominated by network effects. The shortfall, the financing gap that's often been spoken of in recent times is very focused on the power space. You have about $23 billion out of the often spoken about 35 or so billion. And that, of course, is the lion's share of the power financing gap in the continent. And what has come through of late in the power space is the 1/4 or so of spending that takes place is focused very much on just maintenance. So the capex that is badly needed is not coming through, which is why it is always highlighted as a very interesting sector for investors who have significant sums to sort of bring into play. Of course, the power financing space is not just about gaps and low coverage. It's also a sector that is characterized by very high costs, as again must have been highlighted in different discussions today. We've seen how the average tariff levels are quite high in Africa, much higher than we see in other developing regions. When our colleague from the African Union this morning opened, he talked about both hard and soft aspects of the infrastructure challenge. And I think it's the issues of inefficiencies and regulatory frameworks that come through very strongly in the power sector. The water sector similarly has problems, but it's got a different set of features actually. So I'll sort of not dwell too much on water. Again, we will come to some of those aspects in some of the discussions. There's a couple of key themes and highlights that came out today. First of all, the obvious thing is there's been a lot of growth in GDP. Africa is the new flavor. Everybody's excited about the future, but the bad news is, of course, power production has not kept up with growth, and that's still the story today. The key trends, the key exciting opportunities ahead has to do with new cost-reflective tariffing coming through many countries. You're even having regional-based decision-making coming through on trying to get rid of the national sort of the politics come out of it by taking a regional approach to that. We're seeing new refits come through beyond just one or two countries. Renewable energy feed-in tariffs, again, this is becoming a trend that's going to respond to the global agenda to try to reduce emissions and the like. And then, of course, we have some increased support beginning to come through in terms of mitigating the risk of utilities, offtake risks, not just relying on PPAs in their own right, but also having some support to them in the form of guarantees. Of course, we were reminded that legal frameworks continue to be a challenge throughout the continent. A lot of talk about it, a lot of problematizing around it, but again, very few countries that have closed the loop on that. A lot of work still outstanding on the soft work and support that needs to go into that. And then, of course, on the trends, we heard not just about new funds, not just about new discoveries, and not just about new technologies, but we heard about some vexing issues on the industrial policy side, where countries are trying to tie up business and industrial opportunities linked up to the refit agenda. So there's a lot of tariff issues, trade issues that are going to come through there as to how does one open up a more regional and global marketplace that allows strong companies who already have demonstrated products to come through. To what extent does one want to protect the domestic industry? What kinds of incentives does one offer? It's not just dealing with the power challenge, it's about all those linkages coming back to to employment generation. And of course, the national strategic interest always comes through in terms of the backward and forward linkages to the economy. We heard from Peter, of course, that where countries are rebounding, the focus tends to be on expansion and the rehabilitation of existing power plants that are underperforming, and we're seeing very strong signs of how ZIM is showing that its commitment is going to come through in terms of two specific projects that I'm very familiar with, very exciting. I think they will happen. That is confirmation that ZIM is turning around, and there will be more opportunities down the line.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.